The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
You know, in this world of merchants, they're going back and forth. What is motivating them? What is the currency when, all you're doing is trading goods for money back and forth, and they're trying to make better trades? The merchant's crown ends up being this kind of jargon of their culture, where as they're sitting around at night, the merchants are all comparing the trades they made. So the idea of it is both kind of showing that these people valorize the story and the prize that comes with being able to burnish something's market value with a story. Because a walnut being traded for an elephant is impossible unless that walnut comes with a really good story.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. This episode is brought to you by the Habit Membership for Writers, of which I'm also the host. I'd love to see you there. You can find out more at thehabit.co. Besides being an author, Daniel Nayeri is a publisher, a pastry chef, and a raconteur. His book, Everything Sad is Untrue, a lightly fictionalized story of his growing up as an Iranian immigrant in Oklahoma, won all kinds of awards, and with good reason. His new book is The Many Assassinations of Samir, the Seller of Dreams. Daniel Nayeri, I'm so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's a blast to be here.
I think a lot of my listeners will know you from Everything Sad is Untrue, your autobiographical novel about junior high, basically. Junior high and Iran, and junior high in Oklahoma, and everything else in every era of history in Iran. Yeah.
I like it. You did it like the house that Jack built, junior high in Iran, junior high and Iran, and the problems of a young Oklahoman.
Yeah.
Junior high Iran, the problems of a young Oklahoman, and the instability of memory.
Do you think of yourself as an Oklahoman?
Absolutely. I'd be, oh my gosh. Yeah. And honored to, I still, anytime someone says Oklahoma, for any reason, in any social setting, the phrase that will come out of my mouth is greatest state in the union.
Love it. Yeah.
I adore Oklahoma. In a lot of ways, I feel like Oklahoma was the only place we could have landed. And it gave me the kinds of things that I think saved my life. So there are far more. The first book I ever wrote, unpublished, as yet, but was just a love letter to Oklahoma. That's probably why it was unpublished. It needed something else, but I think as I continue, and there may be follow-up books about maybe later years, you start to see a character like, the character in that book is certainly autobiographical. It's me. I sometimes refer to him as the character so I can, do surgery on him without getting too squeamish. And that, you'll see him start to kind of get his wits about him more, kind of understand the culture more, and as a result, appreciate the beauty of it more, and be able to actually understand what is on offer. And what's on offer in Oklahoma is top tier in terms of raising young men. That's for sure.
Yeah. What was that? The movie by, oh, good grief. Now I'm drawing a complete blank. The
Citizen Kane.
What's that?
Citizen Kane. I was just getting
not that one. No.
Oh, okay.
The guy who did the Tree of Life.
Terrence Malick.
And he has the movie about the Oklahoman who brings his French wife back to Oklahoma. Do you know this movie?
I don't, but I should.
To the Wonder is that movie.
To the Wonder.
Yeah.
Why
so
do I know about this?
Yeah. So this French woman moves to Oklahoma, and you're expecting it to be, I came from France and now I'm stuck in Oklahoma, but she sort of comes alive in Oklahoma. Yeah. And there's I may be getting this movie wrong. Who knows? It's been a long time since I watched it, but there's this great scene where she's at like a state fair, and she's just dazzled by the whirling lights of the Midway, or whatever you call it.
Yeah. I'm glad I didn't see it before I wrote the book, because that's basically the premise. Except instead of a French woman, Iranian child.
Yeah, right. Well, I love to hear you talking about how much you love Oklahoma, because I guess I was picturing, here's a guy who's living in Middle America, seems a little, Oklahoma has a reputation for being a little on the drab side. For those,
how dare you? I know.
I'm sorry.
People, dumb, lazy screenwriters in Hollywood will use Oklahoma as a punchline to imply whatever it is that they think is valuable, such as, it doesn't have the nowest and wowest clubs where you can get whatever hallucinogenics you're looking for, I guess, and that makes it somehow déclassé. But I anytime I'm around that kind of lazy writing, phrases like flyover, like that, boy, that's a fast way to get me up in your face. I
noticed you just got up in my face, and I was just citing other people. I wasn't even saying that for myself.
Where are they? Who are these people? Show me their place. How big a boy are they? And I love, one, because it's like, I'll defend a place that has more good people than any other place I've ever met. So I don't take that joke as anything other than an insult to people like Coach Arndt, who were the greatest men I ever came across, right? But also, it just isn't. It just fundamentally isn't that. It's just such a wonderful, and as every state, I suspect. Look, I adore Oklahoma. I think it's the greatest state in the union. But if some guy who'd been raised in Michigan came up to me and said Michigan is the greatest thing, I would respect and disagree. But nonetheless, there's a kind of patriotism or local pride or whatever that allows me to appreciate somebody else's local pride, right? I love my mother because she's my mother, right?
Not because in any objective sense, I think she's the greatest woman in the history of the world. I mean, she feels like me, but
it's you. Yeah. And this is you have hit on the exact right metaphor for that, right? Is the state and the mother, this is my tribe. This is my whatever it is. This is my state. I will treat it as if it is so precious and valuable that any harm to it should be defended, and any value I can add to it is worth my time, and what I'm doing is worthwhile because what I'm doing is benefiting this great thing. These are good ideas to have, not because you're then so stupid that you think that the only place in the world that's good is Oklahoma. Of course I don't. I've been to other wonderful places. There's lots of them. But that is an important and right mental state to be in order to be someone who is maximally helpful to the people around them. And when you wake up in the morning, like, it's really, I mean, like, I'm one of these people, it's the book I just wrote is very much about, and a lot of the stories I write are about purpose. Finding, it's because it's something I struggle with a lot, is like, what is the purpose? Like, what, I'm not someone who wakes up and bounds out of bed like a little bunny. I'm like, all right, I got to do another one of these. Like, all right, fine. Like, it's not easy. And so as a result, I like schema. I like mental habits that help someone understand their purpose for the day, even if it's like, this is my purpose for the day. This is why I'm a pastry chef. Is a recipe is your purpose for the next 2 hours. And people will be like, don't you love changing the recipe? And I'm like, I love writing a new recipe, but once I'm inside the recipe, I have a purpose, and it's this, and it's wonderful. And you can be really, really good and deliver that same recipe with better and greater achievement of your purpose than somebody else. And so there's work to be done. There's qualitatively differing work to be done. And this is good. This is a good thing to have for the next 2 hours, because the alternative is despair.
The alternative to what is despair?
Purposelessness.
Okay. Yeah. The alternative. Yeah. Okay. The alternative to purpose is despair. Sure.
Yeah. Then what else is there? I mean, if you're without purpose, without your waking, this is such a broad statement. It's just a truism, but yeah, I mean, it's, for a brain like mine, it needs to drive somewhere or it will drive into a wall, right? Like, you need to have a destination. So, are
you talking about habits right now? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about finding a purpose. Let's define our terms then.
Yeah.
If we're sort of need some of that. So I think in this case, I'm using the word purpose broadly to mean a reason to do and something and a direction to do it. So, for example, we began the topic by saying people can get into a habit of saying, my mother is the greatest mother in the world. And how can they hold that at the same time, if they're any intelligent at all? They either have to say, okay, now anyone else who says, oh, but I have the best mother in the world, you are now at odds and are in some form of conflict that can reach violence pretty quickly. So we can either fight with everybody who disagrees that my mother is the best mother, or I can be just intelligent enough to say, I am saying something that is objectively not true, but locally true, right? So objectively, my mother is not the greatest mother of all time. And Oklahoma is not the greatest state of all time or the greatest place. It's just objectively not true. It could be true, right? It very well could be if we do an assessment, but it's just too difficult for our brains. And we don't have the resources or the data to know whether Oklahoma in the year 1995 was the best place for a young man to land instead of, say, Athens in the ancient times, or Paris or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so we can't be dumb enough to think we've said an objective statement. But then why make that statement? Why not live in the world of saying, well, it's whatever, it's good, it's this, it's that. And I was making the case that it's actually a useful statement. It's a useful statement to walk around saying, I think Oklahoma is the greatest state in the union. And so then I began by saying, let us ask ourselves why. Why would a lie, if as we know it, be a helpful lie? And in this case, the answer is because it offers us a purpose. So if I am someone who says Oklahoma is the greatest state in the union, I am motivated to help it be so. I'm motivated to tell people that. And in order to tell people that, I need a second sentence. Oklahoma is the greatest state in the union. Why? And now my job is to go gather information. And how do I gather information about Oklahoma's greatness? One, I invest myself in Oklahoma. I become a reporter of Oklahoma. There's a reporter actually in Oklahoma who's known for a segment called "Is This a Great State or What?" And his whole job is to go and find like that one restaurant off the side of the highway that's a shack but has like the best ribs you've ever had in your life. Yeah. He's also the one who knows the history of the best watering holes in Oklahoma. He's the person who knows. Did you actually know that this movie was shot in Oklahoma? Did you know the Brad Pitt is an Oklahoman? All the great, did you know Jim Thorpe is an Oklahoman? Will Rogers is an Oklahoman? Okay. So first and foremost, I start to read and research the history of my state in order to give you lots of reasons why it's the greatest state. The next thing I do, of course, is try to add to that list. How? Mm-hmm. Well, I want that restaurant to do well. I don't want McDonald's to do well in Oklahoma. I want Ted's to do well in Oklahoma. I want Casino Domino to do well in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Why? Because Casino Domino has the best cheese sauce on the planet. If you want cheese sauce, you're one of those people who sits down at a Mexican restaurant and loves the fact that they give you free salsa and some of them give you free cheese sauce instead of making you order it. Casino Domino in Oklahoma City, that's your spot. Not only am I no longer just a journalist of Oklahoma, I am an investor in Oklahoma now because I want to add to that list. Third tier of purpose becomes not only am I a journalist, a documenter of its greatness, not only am I an investor of its greatness, but now I can be a creator in its greatness, which means, well, I'm gonna go. I have friends there because I have got to go to Casino Domino with somebody, and now we start to build things there. You start to actually, there's a bookstore coming in. Hey, did you know they need help? Let's go do it. All those three things are all motivated by a notion and a desire to present oneself and one's community well. That purpose is derived from a concept that is fundamentally may or may not be true. None of that matters, is my point. And so I was sort of shorthand with it, but all of those three things are born out of that kind of statement. And so I find it helpful.
Chesterton said, men didn't love Rome because they were great, because it was great. Rome became great because men loved her. So
good job, Chesterton.
Yeah. So I do feel like one thing you're doing in both of your books that we haven't even, we both talked about Oklahoma, not the fact that you have a new book called The Many Assassinations of Samir, the Seller of Dreams. You're not afraid of a long title, are you?
Oh, I adore them. This was the short version. You
should have considered a subtitle to go with that. Well, actually, there was something you said in that book. So, actually, why don't you give me a quick overview of what this book is about? Because I love you got a big charlatan in there. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's set on the 11th century Silk Road, and the Silk Road was this network of trade routes from far eastern China all the way to Baghdad, and it's a pretty inhospitable tract of land, and in it begins, as I said, in the 11th century with a young boy who is a monk at a monastery and has committed an accidental heresy, and so he's about to be stoned to death. But enters this merchant, a portly huckster, who swindles the monks and purchases the young monk, and that's how we get our little odd couple, right? This young boy named Monkey, who is a very severe, very religious young man who's just now been sold into the service of this merchant named Samir, who calls himself the Seller of Dreams, and who is, at least in Monkey's perspective, a deeply unserious man. And so as they begin their kind of troubled relationship, they don't like, certainly Monkey doesn't like Samir. They find out that all these villages that Samir had been going through swindling had gotten pretty upset. And so they each hired a different assassin to come and kill him. And so what ensues is a chase along the Silk Road where this young boy, Monkey, has to keep saving his master's life from a Hessian berserker and a Mongolian gunner and also the Roman legion and the Bedouin clan, and it just keeps going. And in that comedic kind of action adventure, you get the real story of how Monkey and Samir come to become a family, and how they come to understand sort of what Monkey calls the expensive and expansive nature of love.
I love the way, so you say in your author's note that the Silk Road is the most magical place you can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Which you make a good case for that in this book. I love the way the Silk Road itself provides so much of the material for this, the confluence of cultures, the danger, the deserts, in so many ways, the setting does a lot of the work, a lot of the heavy lifting for you, right? You don't have to try that hard to get a variety of interesting characters. All you have to do is just tell what was really on the Silk Road.
It's true. One of the stats that really blew my mind when I was doing my research was the Silk Road in the 11th century had more religions, more languages spoken, more people groups, more ethnicities, more of everything than modern day Manhattan.
Wow.
And I found that mind-blowing for a lot of reasons, but one of them is just that, we presume that the modern city, especially modern New York, is going to be the most whatever, like it's the melting pot, it's the most diverse, it's the salad bowl, it's all these phrases we use. And it is in some ways, but it did not have a monopoly on this concept.
Now, wait a minute. In Manhattan's defense, it's a lot smaller than the Silk Road.
That's a fact, and a lot less welcoming. Than the desert. You're absolutely right. I think even if you include sort of the environs, the five boroughs, but you're right about that. I think, but speaking of, I think the concept being, along the merchant routes, that this is how we get the proliferation of religions across these massive land masses, and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
And also, I should also mention, and I've thought about this before in Westerns, the American West is vast, but there are only certain roads, and people would run into each other. And so in the same way, maybe the Silk Road, if you add up the real estate of the actual Silk Road, maybe it's not much.
I think it's still pretty vast. You're right. Yeah. But yeah, there's actually these 4 capitals where that is what was happening. And it's sort of, it begins in far eastern China, and what was then called Chang'an, and now it's Xi'an. And then it goes to Turfan in western China, then Samarkand in modern Uzbekistan, and Baghdad. And there's a lot of trading posts, a lot of caravanserais and things like that across the routes. But the big sort of epicenters are there, and you see that each of them, like, their economies grow, and basically, like Xi'an's entire, like, their base was silk. They clearly were, and they had a monopoly on that for a very, very long time. Turfan was set in just like one of the most fertile areas on the planet, and it's just a garden capital. It had more dried fruits. It's actually, to this day, it's shocking if you watch any documentaries on Turfan or Samarkand. There's just 17 varieties of raisins, will be on sale in this market, and you'll just be like, okay, I'm sorry to admit, I didn't realize there were 17 varieties. Some of them are gigantic, and just all kinds of, the dried every kind of fruit, and meats and stuff. And so you look at that and you go, golly, that was the Costco of its day, right? It's just a gigantic food center, which, how
far is it, by the way, from Xi'an to Baghdad?
How far? That's a good question. By miles, I'd have to look that up. It's quite literally, from all of the Asia continent, right? Yeah, it's because Xi'an is almost on the coast of China on that side, and then you're getting all the way to Iraq. So yeah, it's a while.
All right, so, and I guess I had considered the variety of life on the Silk Road before, but what I hadn't really given much thought to was layered on top of that is the sort of built-in stories of the Silk Road. Layered on top of that is the fact that these merchants, their job was storytelling. You make it very clear, especially in the case of Samir, that everything's based on his ability to spin a story.
Right.
And he's just an exaggerated and metastasized version of what's true of all the merchants on the Silk Road, which is I've got a story to tell, hopefully an honest story. In the case of Samir, rarely an honest story about this product and why you should, why we should do business. And I just loved that the stories within the stories within the stories, which you do this in Everything Sad is Untrue, and you also do it in this book too. The ways that somebody starts telling a story, and then there's a story inside that story, and there may be another one inside of that. Just so richly textured. I just love the way you do that. And is there something specifically Eastern about that way of doing things, that way of talking?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of like, when you just study narratology and how that works, I mean, a lot of times the term for that is the Chinese box narrative or the Arabian Nights narrative. And they're fundamentally the same. And the Chinese box narrative sort of refers to the concept of, there's the box, and then inside that is another box, and inside that is another box, kind of like the babushka dolls, nesting dolls. Those are all the kind of the visual metaphors people will use. But, the way that stories are told in Iran certainly are all, I mean, that's just the method. So in some ways people will ask, like, are you going to do that again for your next book? I'm like, that's it. That's like that. That's how I tell stories.
That's all you got.
That's like asking, are you going to have a climax in your next movie? And it's like, yeah, probably. I'll probably end up having one. Is that a problem? So for me, that's just the way I think. I love it. I try to apply it in different ways and different contexts. I don't like doing the same thing. It's not, I don't even consciously do it. It's just how a story becomes interesting to me. So getting a chance to write a graphic novel, one of the first things I'm going to do is try to make it juicy, the stuff I love. And the stuff I love is that kind of the bravado and the panache of a storyteller, the Cyrano de Bergerac quality of, standing and delivering. And so I want the storyteller to be a character. I want often, and then I love openings of stories, and I love the playing with them as objects, and so I want my characters to do that, and so they often end up doing that. The moments where stories are being delivered are often the most high stakes. Why? Well, a police interrogation is one of those things. A trial, like Grisham style, is one of those things. Like we tell stories in our, standing before the court of the king, and Solomon's going to cut the baby. That's all. Like we're all telling our stories, and so to me, those are also just happen to be the most high stakes, high tension, high drama kind of moments in life. So all that comes together, and I just adore telling stories that way. I'll tell you, but as you said it, there was a moment I had an insight that may or may not be true, and I'll just sort of say it and we can decide afterward. I've been reading and thinking a lot about the nature of how tea works in Iran, and like, in Britain, of course, you have tea at breakfast and tea at tea time. In Iran, we have a samovar. A samovar is just like this apparatus that sits on top of coals, or sometimes there's coals already, there's a space for them. And all it does is keep water hot at all times. It's just a big, beautiful brass or whatever thing, and it keeps water hot at all times. And the reason for that is so that you can brew tea whenever someone comes over. Like the minute you enter someone's house, their job is to offer you tea, and you have tea 10 minutes later. Tea is had almost on the hour sometimes. And certainly if you're even working, even if you're in a place where you're working in an orchard, in my grandfather's kind of house, as I remember it, tea was something that was at breakfast, then again, kind of at 11, then again at noon, at lunch.
Like Hobbit tea.
Very Hobbit tea. Yeah, exactly. And so stories have a serial nature because stories get interrupted a lot, because you're telling the story around tea, and then you've got to go do work. You got to go live your life, or you got to do whatever. And then you reconvene around tea again. I wonder if that has something to do with it, because often, obviously in the Arabian Nights, what's happening is a recursion of evenings, day interrupts. In fact, every story in the Arabian Nights ends with, and the light of the rising sun entered the building or entered the window, and Scheherazade lapsed into silence. Like she's interrupted by the sunlight. And so, in some ways, this sort of serialized, broken up story within a story, characters going further down these, Chinese boxes or however you want to call them, nesting. This is all very natural to the way and the context the stories are told. It's not, I'm going to go into a theater for 90 minutes, be given an act 1, an act 2, and an act 3, and then like, wow, that was a spectacle. That's cool. And I love that as a Western mode, or even I'm going to open a novel and read it from page 1 to, page end. Those aren't the ways you take in stories. And so I think the content changes as well.
But also that story that's interrupted throughout the day, there's also a story of the day, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
The day is a story, and then these, or, there's a boy in Oklahoma sitting in a room around those stories with the kids who are, doing their shenanigans.
Sure.
And then inside that boy's head, inside that box, are all these other stories of Iran, and so the idea of the story within a story is that's just life. Also.
Yeah. I think if I were to evolve, and I'd like to evolve and try to like the kind of projects that scare me and intrigue me, and like I would require greater skill to be able to pull off, would be those kind of panoply of voices, those ensemble kind of moments where you're now sort of experiencing everyone's story as a semi-cacophonous but semi-euphonious collection. That would be a real. I'm very intrigued by that. It would be like, people say James Joyce wanted to publish Ulysses on a ring so that no one could tell you where the beginning was and where the end was. It strikes me as like that size of like obnoxious to try to write one of those as, kind of like deliver it straight and give some, and I wonder if people would just grab their heads and scream and be like, who's talking?
As you were talking about that, I was thinking about this. This may be an opposite mode of storytelling. I don't know, but the stories you see that have the same event told from different points of view.
Yeah,
so,
I love those.
Whether that's Marilyn Robinson's books about Gilead, same story over and over again, but told, it's a very different story because it's told by different people.
Exactly.
Or even As I Lay Dying, where each chapter has a different narrator telling more or less the same story.
Faulkner did that. So far that he's the high watermark of that, I think. But
but the kind of story you described, is the thing Faulkner did in As I Lay Dying the kind of thing you're talking about, or are you talking about something else?
That would be one iteration of it, but also like Spoon River Anthology would be another iteration where it's not everybody telling the same story, but in that it's a poetry collection where you're sort of reading the epitaph of everyone in town. You're going through, and it's a small little poem, and you're experiencing their story. And I think that what that means to everybody is different. That's how they present it. But you start to also see the overlapping ways their lives come together. There's a modern version of that in a different poetry collection that does it with a little bit more story. Spoon River Anthology kind of is what's the word? The poems are each, I think, no more than 15 lines, and you see the connective tissue, but it's sort of sparse. Whereas David Rakov wrote, and I have to look up the title because it's one of those impossible to remember titles. It's called Love, Dishonor, Marry, Die, Cherish, Perish.
Which is the whole thing's in verse, isn't it?
The whole thing is in Rakovian couplets, which are Alexandrian couplets, but I think Rakov deserves to have. It's a lot of despairing lives. It's not a happy book. It's not even a particularly pleasant read, but it is about all these lives sort of interconnecting and them telling their story, and you really get to hear their voice as it goes. I think As I Lay Dying, a good example of, this version of one event, multiple angles. But then you also just get all these lives intertangled, all of their perspectives. Those are, you're right that they're sisters, but they're different.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about the idea of the merchant's crown. That's an idea that's woven throughout Samir, the many assassinations of Samir, the Seller of Dreams.
That's right.
I'm practicing. I'm trying to get this title there. Is the idea of the merchant's crown something that you invented?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know,
Right.
sure. Yeah, I mean, it was a flight of fancy with me sitting in a chair, but who knows to what extent. I didn't know Terrence Malick had already written my first book. No, it is an idea, and it was actually born out of, as any writer, you sit there and you're like, what do these people want? And I had in Samir a character that, in some ways, is very much a letter to my dad. My Everything Sad is very much a kind of me observing my mother. I got to observe her from close up, and so I had a lot to say. I had a good sense, and I still do. I think there's a whole lot more to her than just that book. But I got to sort of catch all those details. With my dad, he was from a little bit from further away, and a little bit more of his persona was available to me than his person. And so in this, I wanted to write. I mean, in some ways, these are stand-ins, right? I mean, I was clearly Monkey. I was a little boy who was very serious, and he cared about principles and honor, and I sort of saw my dad as a man who was irreligious and unserious, and without the ability to distinguish the truth from anything. And I had a very legalistic kind of approach as a little kid. I was a serious little child. And so, and I think, with this, I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit and ask myself, what is it that Samir wanted? Because as you go through the book, look, I mean, as with any odd couple, they each have to learn something, right? And it's clear that Monkey needed to learn to hold on a little more loosely, to give a little bit more mercy to people. Even the conversation we had at the beginning of this, right? To like, a young Daniel would never have said that phrase. He would have said, if it's objectively untrue that this place, then don't say it. That would have been like, okay, all right. But if everybody knows it's objectively untrue, it's not like you're tricking anyone. No one's going to be like, oh my God.
No, I had no idea.
Truly, I had no idea. So if everybody knows, is that okay, little Daniel? And like little Daniel would have been confused by that, right? What Monkey needs to learn is exactly that there are times where you can be merciful. You don't have to be so much a little judge of the planet. What did Samir need to learn? And was the question. What was his motivation? And the merchant's crown was the phrase that came for that. Put short, the idea was, in this world of merchants, they're going back and forth. What is motivating them? What is the currency when, all you're doing is trading goods for money back and forth, and trying to make better trades? The merchant's crown ends up being this kind of jargon of their culture, where as they're sitting around at night, the merchants are all comparing the trades they made. And if you got some silk from Xi'an and took it all the way to Baghdad and got a good deal for it, that's just market value. Like there's nothing impressive about that. But if you manage to make a really lopsided trade, right? If you could get somebody to give you a bolt of silk for, a bundle of, sand-eaten wool, then wow, and so to them, the merchant's crown becomes bigger and bigger and mythological. Like it becomes like the fairy tale where, the brave little tailor trades, he trades in on his sash and becomes a king. And you're like, wow, he just keeps trading up. And so the idea of it is both kind of showing that these people valorize the story and the prize that comes with being able to burnish something's market value with a story. Because a walnut being traded for an elephant is impossible unless that walnut comes with a really good story.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right.
and so in that sense, that's where the merchant's crown comes from, and that is what Samir talks about as wanting. And it's unclear at first when he's asking. At first, he's sort of, what Monkey thinks he means is exactly what I just said. He thinks he wants to like paint some river stones gold and go trick an idiot emir out of his estate. And that is on its face what the merchant's crown looks like. But fundamentally, you start to kind of perceive, and Samir even starts to learn, it's what else in this life we sacrifice ourselves for, and what other lopsided trades we make for the ones we love. And so that sort of starts to look more and more like the merchant's crown.
Yeah. He says early in the book that the merchant's crown is just greed dressed up as poetry.
Yeah, the Monkey says that. Yeah,
Monkey says that. Yeah,
that's right.
And then he, but then at another point in the book, he says something along the lines of, "We tell these stories and somehow they become true."
That's right.
If that's a paraphrase. I don't know if I got it right, but.
Yeah. Monkey's, got clearly, like, you're watching him. You're watching him take on quite a lot. He is the character coming of age. So yeah, there's a lopsidedness to who's learning. Certainly, he's learning a lot more.
Yeah, and you say Oklahoma is the greatest state in the world, and in the utterance, it becomes a little truer than it was.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
We don't have to talk about Oklahoma the whole time. I've got a few more Oklahoma topics, but I will resist. He also, it's interesting when you talk about his development. At the same time, he calls it greed dressed up as poetry. He calls it a fool's religion, and then later decides. I mean, you better hope it's not a fool's religion, since it's your job, right?
No, that's funny you should say that, but no, I unfortunately am not. I'm not too. I'm not too hyped, in the sense that I do think it's in some ways foolishness. And I had a question pop up. This is one of those, like, I think about all the time, is like, will there be libraries in heaven? The answer is like, no, there won't. So,
wait, what do you mean there's no libraries in heaven? What are you talking about?
This is a different podcast, my friend. We gotta go in it. But yeah, I just finished writing a poem about that, actually. But there can't be. Why would there be? It's not incumbent on me to populate heaven with deeply flawed and unworthy objects. It's incumbent on you to tell me why they would. Besides, where's the publishing logo gonna go? Where's the ISBN still gonna be on the back?
Well, maybe we will schedule another podcast to talk about that. I'd love to hear more about that.
You got it.
Speaking of, we're about to run out of time. So I want to hear you talk about what I always ask people, and that is, who are the writers who make you want to write?
The writers who make me want to write are the ones who either have achieved one of two things perfectly, which is innovation or perfection. So refinement or revolution, right? So like Karen Russell is a level of refinement that could only have happened after the, like, all these, like, we've had generations of great writers, right? Jane Austen exists. And then you come to someone like Karen Russell, and it's like, she can write a sentence more beautiful than possible up until the moment you've read it. And you go, well, okay. And you read a sentence like that, and you just want to sit down and try to look at a daylily and figure out how to express it as well as she would. Or, I sit down and start writing sentences like, it was as dark as that, the sadness felt like I literally need to run exercises when I think about how good Karen Russell's refinement is. And then you get somebody on the other side, somebody who's not refining on the craft, but someone who's actually, taking it over here and like, in some ways may not feel refined at all, but is sort of pushing at the boundary of what it even can do. I think of Borges. I think of Calvino. Calvino's the one. I joke sometimes there are no writers. There's only Italo Calvino. Because what he was doing to novels and to storytelling was just breaking it. And so, the short answer to your question, David Mitchell does that nowadays. Every time he writes something, it's different. So Karen Russell, David Mitchell, Italo Calvino, top A1, Borges, goodness. Those are some big names for me. I also read in the comics world, like art and text at the same time. Those are people who are kind of doing odd visualizations of text, all that kind of thing. So those get me excited. If somebody's really innovating or if somebody's really refining, then I'm very excited. They're doing. And that tends to be the case in a lot of craft, right? Like pastry, is in that space. There's what people will say, like, this is in the refinement stage of the craft, is like we've sort of done all our innovating and now we're doing our refining. Certainly like in the 50s and 60s, like that was the innovation era of film. And then you have to jump to the 90s and you get the innovation era of like CG fundamentally, and like how Jurassic Park and Terminator 2. So you get these like eras of innovation and then eras of refinement.
What does an era of innovation in pastry cooking, pastry baking look like?
Well, most recently, in the 80s and 90s, food in general went through the fusion era, where just the ability to get ingredients, create, and also the desire to look at cultures as they were sort of integrating into one another and sort of crashing into each other, you start to get fusions that were really innovative. So in the United States, and by the way, the United States, I think, benefited the most from that, because pockets of enclaves of immigrants, right, are coming and already, looking at stuff that's happening locally and bringing themselves to it. So, a lot of Vietnamese people had moved to the New Orleans area, right, because the environment is similar. So then Vietnamese Creole cooking is awesome. Yeah. Grab it up if you can. Go eat it. That kind of thing it was happening in different places, and certainly it's happening in like London and Paris as well. Sure. But in the refinement side of pastry, when the Japanese pastry chefs, again, kind of in the aughts, and they were just in love with French pastry, right? French pastry clearly was, had established such an incredible baseline of like innovation and establishment of like, and so it's incredible. Traditional Japanese pastry and dessert doesn't have a lot of dairy in it. It's a lot of red bean. It's a lot of matcha. It's a lot of rice paste. It's not dairy. It's not shortbread. It's not cream. It's not custard. So when that's going over and those Japanese, what do? Well, without speaking too generally, the Japanese are very, very good at bringing an extreme amount of discipline and focus to a craft. They bring it to the French pastry, and all of a sudden you start to see refinements on what people thought couldn't be refined. How are you going to refine a creme brulee? How are you going to, that's done. How are you going to refine a profiterole or a croissant? But they do, and it's through sheer discipline and sourcing and craft. And now, I mean, if you were to say, listen, I have $1 million and I want to eat the best French pastries on the planet, Paris might be a destination, but Tokyo should be a destination as well. And that's a shocking piece of refinement, right? Where you say, are you telling me that the 10 best croissants I could get on the planet, some of them might be outside of France? And the answer is they're in Japan.
Wow. Yeah. All right. If I don't arbitrarily end this, we can talk all day.
We started with Oklahoma and we ended with this pastry. I love it.
Tokyo French pastry. Yeah. So I am arbitrarily ending this.
Sure.
Daniel Nayeri, goodbye. Thank you for being here. This has been great.
Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
I hope a lot of people read Samir. I love it.
It's been an absolute pleasure having me. Thank you so much. I hope we can talk again sometime down the road. Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.